I was
taking.
hoping you would forget.
Oh, thanks for reminding me. Yeah.
Yeah, Wendy. No, kidding. Sorry. So relational empathy is our topic, and I would like us all to collaborate and co-construct what we think a relational empathy is. So by the end of our 2 hours, we should have a conceptual model that is co-constructed with all of us together. So the goal is to think of the model of concepts, which I base on conceptual art. So conceptual art started in the 1960s, and it was this idea that the idea of art was the point, and that was the process, and that was the whole process, was the idea. So you start out with the idea of something to create, and you keep in that process of creation. And if you get a product, great. If you get a piece of art, great. But if you don't, there's still that idea process that is so valuable. So that's what we're going to do today, essentially. And the way that I think the schedule might work, that we will look at the videos and sort of deconstruct the videos together. We don't have to do both if we don't have time. And we can choose which one we want to start with. I'll let you choose in a moment. We can do both. We just have to move a little bit more rapidly. I don't want to spend a lot of time deconstructing them. I just want to take some key ideas out and then go right into the empathy circle. So we should have an empathy circle for about an hour. This is what I'm thinking. And then after the hour of the empathy circle, we'd have about a half an hour left. And during that half an hour, we will be building our conceptual model based on brainstorming, based on your experiences in the empathy circle. Does that sound clear, unclear, good, comfortable? Jana, you're good? Okay, great. All right. So it's fine if you didn't have a chance to view the videos. I know I sent them really late. I could have sent them yesterday and I didn't, and I apologize. So it's okay that you didn't. But how many people did have a chance to look at the videos? Edwin, Wendy, Crystal. I know Violetta, you're super busy up until the last moment, and Lou, you were in a meeting, and Carrie, you were probably coaching, and Jana, you're working. So it's perfectly okay. So we have one video that is what I consider storytelling, really from the heart, a very authentic kind of truth storytelling, which is what I do for the Peace Alliance and the Department of Peace Building, as Jana and Crystal know very well. And then the other is more like a construction of a story about somebody else's thinking. So they're both stories, they're both interpretations, right? And we can gain something from each kind of story and have a relationship with that meaning making. So co-constructing and conceptual modeling requires meaning making for you, right? So you're going to be making meaning for yourself in your own conceptual model of relational empathy while we deconstruct these videos. And I can play the video, I can share my screen and play it, and then pause it whenever you want me to pause it. If you don't say pause here, I have a couple of key places where we could stop, that I've kind of pre-planned, but I'm cool with not doing that. I'm cool with you saying whatever you want, please stop, let's go back. I want to hear that again. I want to talk about that with the group. And we only have about 20 minutes to do this. So chances are we'll only have time to do one. And I just want to say one more thing before I ask you which one you'd like to deconstruct together. And I'm totally open either way. They're both, I think, thick, you know, they have different layers. So we couldn't possibly fit in both. That's just my opinion. Yes, Lou.
And the purpose of us watching the videos together is we're thinking about what is relational empathy. Is that the kind of the question we're thinking about as we're watching the videos?
Right. And so you're
Okay.
building a concept, a conceptual model in your own mind
Okay.
of what is relational empathy.
Got it.
Okay, good, good. And just think of concepts. We're just concept building. So one of the things that attracted me to this particular video that has the actor talking is that it has this interesting title about shoes, right? So a lot of times when you're reading about empathy, it's like, oh, walking in someone else's shoes, right? And it's like, I don't feel that way. That doesn't work for me. But that seems to be the popular culture ideology about empathy. So I love the fact that he said in his title, you know, take off your own shoes. And we'll learn more about what he means by that symbolically and in terms of empathy. And then in the other video about about Stein, she also believes you don't walk in the other person's shoes. So, anybody have any suggestions of where to start, which one to do? Any preference? If you didn't watch them, then it's probably just going by the title and the concepts of the title. You watched them, Wendy. Which one would you like to start with?
Thank you, DJ. I think I'd like to start with the Stein one. I love the story of the other one. Yet I feel I've deconstructed that already for myself, whereas the other one I'm still really processing, but that's just me.
Good point, Crystal.
Yeah, so I am not going to say his name correctly. It's such a beautiful name, but I put it in the chat. Definitely would prefer to start with the other one, but I'm open to following Wendy's lead. I just want to make sure we get to his. There's a wealth of information in there, I believe.
Oh, okay. So I'm kind of hearing that we need to do both, which I think would be a time challenge, but not impossible, right? And the way you say his name, I had to phonetically write it down. O kid diate, O kid diate, O ne duwan. Okay, just so we can try. Jana'd be much better at it than me. So she's very good at saying names that are difficult. So, and who else watched them? Oh, Edwin.
Yeah, I'd go for the Stein one just because she's kind of historically, significant person in terms of the definition of empathy.
Yes, definitely. Anybody else have a preference one way or the other? Right now, we're leaning towards starting with Stein. Anybody opposed to starting with Stein? Jana, do you have a preference? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hold on one second here. Going to make it a little bigger.
DJ, do you know about clicking the two check boxes at the bottom of the share screen when you're doing a video?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's not my problem right now. Okay. My problem is I may have problems because that's just the way it is with my system and my Wi-Fi and everything. But I think I got it. But thank you, Lou, for the reminder. So can you see the screen?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. Now we're going to test the sound.
Century phenomenologist who wrote her
Can you hear that?
Yep.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to make the screen big. And I'm just going to start from the beginning. And if you want me to stop at any point, just, I guess, just say stop, please.
Today I'll be talking about Edith Stein's theory of empathy. Stein was a 20th century phenomenologist who wrote her 1917
See if I can, are you seeing the text on there? I hope not.
dissertation, which developed into a book on the theory of empathy. A lot of contemporary debates about empathy in philosophy and psychology have to do with what happens when we empathize. Now, some say that when we empathize, what we do is simulate that situation that the other person is in with whom we want to empathize and imagine how we would feel in that situation, kind of a putting yourself in another's shoes type of empathy. Another view, sometimes known as mind reading, is that I infer from analogy what another person is feeling based on how they appear to me. I can kind of reason my way into their situation. Edith Stein
Stop it there.
does not agree with either side of this debate.
Did someone say stop?
Sorry, yes, I did. I'm just wondering what the difference between putting yourself in someone's shoes and mind reading is.
I don't think there is a difference, but I could be wrong. Edwin, do you want to answer that?
Well, I think what she's saying here, there's two sort of trying to describe how empathy works. One is that you simulate it inside yourself emotionally, and the other is that you sort of intellectually create a model and then sort of test the model. That's theory is, so it's more of a intellectual understanding of others. So
Yeah, but Stein disagrees with both of those.
Okay.
yeah, and I guess that's coming up, but how she describes it. Yeah.
Yeah, she just said it, actually. So let's go back here a little bit.
Did that answer your question?
Reason my way into their situation. Edith Stein does not agree with either side of this debate. In fact, for her, empathy is just the basic feeling of foreign consciousness in general.
Okay, so Stein rejects both of those, and this is a very short definition for Stein, the experience of foreign consciousness in general. Foreign meaning the other.
When I experience another consciousness, I am empathizing. That doesn't mean that I have to have the same content, the same feelings, the same thoughts, the same fantasies that the other person has in the moment that I am empathizing with them. All it means is that I experience them as a locus of their own subjectivity. And the word empathy that she's using is Einfühlung in German. The word empathy is actually pretty new in both English and in German. It entered the English language actually by way of the German in the early 20th century when psychologist Edward Titchener used it to translate the German word Einfühlung, which means feeling into. And that German word Einfühlung had only been coined a couple decades earlier, actually to describe the way that we experience a work of art as a sort of whole entity unto itself. Back to Stein's theory of empathy here, in light of that background. For Stein, empathy is the basis for intersubjective experience. It's how we come to see that other people are not to be treated as things, but as persons. And she says that empathy is actually an act of perceiving. So it's not a matter of imagining or reasoning. It's a direct perception that is not generated by the person empathizing, but rather has its origin elsewhere in the one empathized with. So it's almost as if in empathizing with another person, I am receiving their subjectivity.
So I see this as the connection. So this dynamic of intersubjectivity, it's between the two. And that's the connection for me.
For Stein.
Yeah.
Empathy is
Can I
just, as we
make a
said, a
comment
very
about that?
basic idea.
So, yeah, what's coming to my mind hearing you say that, DJ, is that receiving the other person requires a certain kind of openness on my part. And if I'm not open, if I'm self-involved and I'm just thinking about myself and then I'm not really open to receiving the other person. And that's what I think of what I think of as empathy is my own. If I'm in an empathic stance, I am open to receiving what is going on in the other person. So I just moved to say
Yeah,
that.
I love that. That's really good.
For her. It's how we experience any being other than ourselves. And this experience depends on a felt sense of difference between oneself and another. It's not a matter of really putting oneself in the other's shoes. It's just a matter of the felt sense of friction between my subjectivity and theirs. And that then provides the basis for more sophisticated forms of interacting with others.
So this is where I don't like the word friction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it as friction. I see it as a fluid boundary. It's a negotiation. Okay, it's really a negotiation of meaning making between two people. And I don't see it as friction. And I think that's something that's a little bit old school to use that word friction.
So even if I feel the other's pain in empathy, I feel it as theirs, not as mine. And then the question might arise, well, how do I feel another's pain without feeling it as my own? And Stein says, well, there's a difference between primordial content of an experience and non-primordial content. Everything that we experience is experienced primordially, but not every experience has primordial content. So, for instance, take the act of memory. When I remember something from my past, perhaps a beautiful beach day, I experience that memory primordially, right? It's present in my consciousness while I'm remembering it. But the content of my memory is not primordial. That is, I'm not experiencing the beach day itself in the present. I'm rather representing it, right? Representing it to myself in the present as something that happened in the past. Therefore, we can say that the act of remembering is a primordial experience with non-primordial content. And this is quite different.
So what she's saying here, that Stein was saying, is that we can look at our own memory of our own experiences as having a primordial experience with non-primordial content. And she's going to make an analogy with empathy. Empathy is the primordial content of the non-primordial content inside yourself. When you're feeling empathy, it's non-primordial inside yourself, even though it's a primordial experience for the other.
What does primordial mean?
Like organic, like within you. Like alive, the lived experience of beingness. So phenomenology is all about beingness, right? Beingness. I'm being right now in this moment. So that's primordial. So if I'm having an experience right now, that's a primordial experience. If I'm having a memory of a primordial experience, that makes the content non-primordial.
Okay.
She's going to make the analogy in a minute, so I'll just let that happen.
Different from experiencing the beach day in the present, as I did on the day that I went to the beach that I'm now remembering. On that beach day, my experience at the beach both was primordial, right? And it had primordial content, but it's non-primordial content now that I'm remembering it. And memory is not the only kind of experience that has non-primordial content for Stein. She includes fantasy and expectation, right? So fantasy or imagining and expectation or prospectively envisioning what's going to happen in the future as examples of primordial experiences with non-primordial content as well. She uses this account of primordial experiences with non-primordial content.
So in your own being, inside yourself, you have memory, you have fantasy, you have expectations and imagination and all those things that happen inside of you. That is an experience that Stein is calling primordial because it's real for you, but the content is not real. So that's non-primordial content.
As the basis for her account of empathy.
So now she's going to make the parallel with empathy of when you are experiencing empathy, it's the reverse of your memory.
Because empathy also is a primordial experience with non-primordial content. When I experience another person's feelings, their feelings are non-primordially represented to me. And this experience is empathy. And yet, of course, there are key differences between memory, fantasy, expectation on the one hand, and empathy on the other. And the key difference is that in fantasy, expectation, and memory, the content is originating within myself. So these experiences all have their ultimate foundation in my primordial experience. But this is not the case for empathy. In empathy, I am faced with something that has its foundation in the primordial experience of another person. And so she writes on the problem of empathy, this other subject is primordial, although I do not experience it as primordial. The feelings of the other, we might say, are something that I cannot directly access in principle. And this is fundamentally distinct from imagination, memory, expectation. And the fact that empathy has its origin in something outside myself is what makes it a kind of perceiving. Stein says that the subject of empathized experience is not the subject empathizing, but another, the person empathized with. And this is what is fundamentally different with memory, expectation, and fantasy of our own experiences. And I really like this one quote from her in the text where she says, "While I am living in the other's joy, I do not feel primordial joy. It does not issue live from my eye." So we don't need to feel primordial joy in order to empathize with the person who is feeling joy and enjoy their joy, right? So if I'm at a concert with a friend and they're loving it and I'm sort of like meh about it, but I really love that person, I can be happy for them, right? But I'm not going to imagine that it's me who's the one enjoying the concert. I'm still going to be like, okay, when is this going to be over? And one of the things that makes Stein's phenomenology of empathy different from some of the contemporary debates about empathy is that for her, empathy doesn't bridge the gap between self and other such that we would have a kind of blurred line between the two. It's actually what discloses the gap between self and other, because it gives us this felt sense of a subjectivity outside of myself. I directly experience the other in my perceptual field as an embodied consciousness. And this also intersects with the phenomenological view of the body, where there's not a dualism between body and mind. So I'm not seeing the body of the other person and then inferring that they must be a subject like me. Rather, I experience their subjectivity directly as something that I am receiving by virtue of being in the presence of it.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. So can we just go into an empathy circle, or do you feel that you need to say, okay, good, okay. So I'll see you in an hour then.
Oh, should we break out or do one circle? Is that you thinking? Two groups?
How many do we
Better to
have?
break out? Probably since we only have an hour, it's probably better to break
Okay.
out, I would think.
I think so.
All right.
I agree. You're going to get a lot more done in a smaller breakout room. And just try to think of concepts that you want to bring back to the group. That's the only thing I can say. Or just speak about what's alive for you. That's fine too, of course, always.
So just to clarify, DJ, is the main focus, the main question, what is relational empathy?
Yeah, conceptually.
Conceptual.
What are the concepts of relational empathy?
Thank you.
How would you like the rooms to be? Do you have a preference of how to divide who would be in the different rooms?
No, you and Lou are facilitators, or is there somebody else that should be I don't know. Edwin,
Well,
who
Lou
else can
can
be?
record, so if you would, okay,
Who else can facilitate besides you two?
everybody can.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone can.
Okay, what about Violetta and Crystal? Let women do some facilitating.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's have some fun with that. Edwin, is
Okay.
that cool?
Yeah, that's
Cool.
great.
I think it's cool.
Okay, so we'll have one with Violetta, DJ, Wendy, and myself, and then the other one will record that, and the other one will be facilitated by Crystal, and then Lou, if you could record that
Okay.
room, and then it would be Jana and Kara. Does that work?
Sounds good. Is that good with
Okay.
you, Crystal?
Okay, here we
Violetta?
go. Oh. Okay. And we're staying in this room here, 4 of us. All right. You're muted, Violetta.
Do you need to do something here, Edwin?
No, you're all set. I'm recording.
Told me to close the rooms, but
Do you mind if I use the little timer? I can put it on my screen. Do you mind,
sure.
Wendy? Edwin, do you mind?
Sure, good. Try it out.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Fine.
I love it. It just really
Mhm.
helps me to know how much time I have. So I'll put it on my screen, but you're facilitating, Violetta.
Okay, sure.
So
Yes.
how many minutes are we doing?
4 minutes a person. Okay. Are you ready to start? Okay, what kind of concepts could we bring back to the main group based on the video we saw? Concepts related to empathy and relational empathy. Who would like to start?
I'm good with starting. I was hoping Wendy would raise her hand, but I'll speak to Wendy. Yeah. So, oh, cool. That's a nice little timer. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
I have to learn how to set that one up. So if you want to reflect
Never
that,
seen it
Wendy.
before.
So you're just reflecting on the cool timer that DJ is using.
Yeah. So Edith Stein is interesting. I kind of thought, oh, Edith Stein, Violetta's into phenomenology. She'll like this because Stein is sort of based on, seen as one of the big phenomenologists, and Violetta is very much into it. So my first thought was, oh, she'll really like that. So
You're sharing how when you realized that it was a video on Edith Stein, who's very into phenomenology, you immediately thought about Violetta and her appreciation of phenomenology.
yeah, I do think that the sort of Stein's sort of definition, explanation is more from a bit more individualistic. She's saying you as a person connecting with someone else. So it's not what I would, it's not quite what I'm thinking of in terms of relational empathy. Everything's a relationship, you could say that, but I think the relational empathy is more an awareness of the relationship.
So you're sharing how for you, Stein's definition of empathy is very much more individualistic than it's much more to do with you and the other. whereas for you, the relational is much more awareness of the whole.
Yeah, the relationship, there's two people or there's three, there's a whole group of us, and sort of aware, a sense of awareness of the full group. And what's the level of empathy between the four of us versus just my level of empathy or yours towards me, Wendy, listening to me. But what's the level of the group empathy?
So what you're sharing is that taking this group as an analogy, it's that awareness. For you, relational empathy is it's not just the sum total of the whole group. It's like how much empathy you might have or I might have as a listener. So for you, relational empathy is awareness of the whole group's empathy levels.
Exactly. And that sort of starts with that mutuality. It's like, we have the term or the values of mutuality, and you don't hear that talked a lot. It's like, hey, you as an individual are empathic to other people, but there's not a lot of talk, of the mutuality of the empathy. And I think that relational empathy sort of starts with that awareness of the mutuality of empathy.
So what comes to mind for you is this value of mutuality, which isn't talked about that much. And yet for you, relational empathy is all about that mutuality. It's not just about the other, it's the mutuality.
Yeah, and it sort of scales up to the concept of a culture of empathy, right? It's like all the systems and structures in a culture that support the group's sort of awareness of this group level of empathy.
Yes, so it's the mutuality is kind of scaled up to a whole culture of empathy, which allows that relational empathy to be much clearer when it's scaled up.
Feel fully heard. Thanks.
Thank you, Edwin. Violetta, would you be my listener, please?
Pleasure.
Thank you. So where to start? Yeah, this idea of the experience of radical otherness that Stein talks about. For me, that I can really see why DJs use this as an example of relational empathy.
What stood out for you is this idea of radical otherness, and you could see how that spoke to relational empathy for DJ.
And now hearing Edwin's take on that, that's really very a different interpretation of balancing the mutuality and the radical otherness. That's quite a
And now you're kind of marrying that with what Edwin was talking about, and how the radical otherness and mutuality could balance each other out in relational empathy.
Yeah, they could. I love the fact you put in the word balance there. Thank you for that, because I was thinking, almost the opposite, that they excluded, but no, thank you for that, Violetta. It's a balance, yeah.
You appreciate the balance word that I saw kind of in your gestures, even though your thought was more towards mutual exclusivity.
Yeah. So one of the things that I feel is so important is to feel very grounded in these definitions. And I'm just thinking of, Joe Bloggs in the street, as we would say. What is empathy in Stein's terms to the ordinary person in the street?
And now you're thinking, you're trying to empathize with the future participants in our course, and how could we ground relational empathy as a concept for them.
Because I think she, Stein mentions that empathy is this gap between the self and other, and I think so many people who come on this kind of course, they don't want that gap. They really want it to be more united as a whole, as a group, as a community, as a culture, as Edwin talks about cultural empathy.
So one of those concerns you have about the future participants that might be just regular people that have not been acquainted with philosophy or psychology of empathy, and how they would see specifically the idea of empathy disclosing the gap between two people, but they probably came to our training more thinking about the togetherness and creating this culture of empathy rather than finding the distance between them.
Yeah, I could easily have chosen to look at the other video because that explores that connection very differently, and I really appreciate the difference in the two videos.
And now you're comparing this video to the other video that explores that specific point of connection. And so you're grateful that DJ chose to present both videos that are looking at it from a very different angle.
Yeah, and I'm just realizing my time is up. So thank you, Violetta. I feel fully heard.
Thank you. So, DJ, would you be my listener?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Edwin was right. Seeing Stein's name got me excited. I love Stein. She has been a major influence in how I've grown in my understanding of empathy.
So you were excited when Edwin knew you'd be excited when you saw Stein's name, because her philosophy has been very central to you.
I do wonder with Wendy how people that have not read any phenomenology would handle the video. Just like Lou had to ask, what does primordial mean? I wonder if the sheer vocabulary would be difficult. I don't know. Maybe if we stop it frequently enough, that would be overcome, and then struggling through the concepts would be very rewarding at the end. But that was another concern I had.
So a concern that you have, another concern that you have, was based kind of like on what Wendy was saying about, the regular Joe, I don't know, Joe Blow, I'm not sure who Joe is, but the regular guy, Joe. In America, we say Joe Blow, which I think is kind of disrespectful, but anyway, the regular person who might be coming to the empathy circle, right? Could they even digest this material, especially with this, concept of primordial, and just the whole idea of phenomenology might be very difficult for the regular person to engage with.
I don't know how to arrive at a relational empathy definition, but I know the disclosing of the gap is also stood out to me, but I think she's just saying this is how we differentiate from the self, and kind of stand in that humility that I would never fully be able to understand the other, but I could still sit in that respect for their otherness and appreciation. So that's another thought of part of relational empathy includes humility.
So for you, part of relational empathy is humility, and this relates to how it stood out for you, how Stein's, or the way they were represented in the video, was represented as the gap between self and others disclosed, and you're thinking that you can see where that might be a little bit off-putting for some people, but you see it as, a way to separate the self from the other, and how you really can't ever completely understand the other. And so that's just Stein's way of kind of saying, you know, this is clear to her in her philosophy.
Mhm. Yes. Thank you, DJ. I think I will stop here, feel fully heard.
Edwin?
Listening.
To me, relational empathy is, you know, everywhere. Relational empathy is between myself and me, between me and one other person. I call it a dyad. Me and two other people, a triad. Me, a small group. Well, I don't know, quadad. I'm not sure what you call this. You know, and then it goes out, you know, completely. You could even have relational empathy with animals, with nature, with governments, with ideas, with art. Going back to kind of like the beginning of what empathy was in terms of the German word, you know, that it really was about art and the relationship with art. So you know, there's even a relationship with things for me.
Yeah, so relational empathy is just very multidimensional. In fact, it is almost is empathy is relational. So it could be internal parts of yourself, the relationship with others, relationship with ideas, with other people, with groups, dyads, animals, nature. So it's almost like empathy is relational empathy.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you're studying relational empathy, like I did in preparation for this, um, you find this concept of relational empathy kind of coined and used a lot in social work and in nursing, where it's something that's part of the profession.
Yes, when you're doing your research on relational empathy, you saw that it was kind of used in social work, and I think you said healthcare too.
Nursing, yeah, healthcare
Nursing.
nursing. Yeah, it's very, very popular in that. But I didn't want to use those because it's so different than an empathy circle. You know, because in an empathy circle, we're all equal. You know, that's the equalizing factor is the empathy circle, correct? So that element of the relational empathy is unique for us.
I'm not quite sure understood, but it's like we're in the empathy circle, and it's relational empathy, and that's unique in terms of what we're doing, being in the empathy circle. I wasn't sure if I got that.
So if you look at social work or you look at nursing, they both have very well-defined empathy models, relational empathy models, because that's what's required in their work, right, in their profession. But there's always this sort of like imbalance, right? Because, you know, the nurse is helping the patient and the social worker is helping the client or whatever. And even though they go for that mutuality, they're going for that mutuality, right? There's not pure mutuality. It's not pure egalitarian. It's not pure equality. But in the empathy circle, it is.
I see. Yeah. So
You are equal to me and I'm equal to Violetta, right?
yeah, in
And
healthcare, there's if a nurse there, if it's not really equal, they're striving towards equality, but it's never
right,
equal because there's a difference in the relationship. And the same thing with in sociology, the studying, you're studying it, it's not totally equal. However, what we're doing here has that equal aspect to it.
right,
Quality.
which brings a different dimension into relational empathy that is not easy to find in the literature.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
really
here we're
think,
really bringing in this equality. Everybody is sort of equal, and you don't
right,
see that in the academic literature around this, that sense of the equality and the mutuality, I guess.
right. I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Evan.
I'll speak to Violetta then.
Listen.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate DJ bringing it into the empathy circle. Like, what are we talking about? How does it relate to the empathy circle? And yeah, so that was on my list of topics. So, so great.
You're going back to grounding whatever we talk about in this training in the empathy circle, and you really appreciate DJ bringing this up.
Yeah, and it's my understanding of relational empathy is that the criticism came out of women's studies at Wellesley University. They're saying that, in therapy, the idea, it was usually men doing therapy, and they're coming from sort of an individualistic culture. So they're seeing what's healthy and natural is sort of this individualism. And yeah.
So you're trying to go historically to the root where relational empathy was born, and it was among women from Wellesley University that are kind of talking about a therapeutic situation in which a man coming from an individualistic culture is providing empathy to others, but from this specific point of I want to say solipsistic,
Yeah.
but yeah.
It's that therapists were men, and men have sort of cultural values, right? It's like individual, you have to be strong, you have to be autonomous. And so when people come to therapy, they say you are healthy if you are strong and individual and you have these values. And women came and then they're telling women you have to have these values, and the women were objecting, saying, well, we have these other values of thinking of the relationship, the family, the whole family as a whole. And so there was they were saying, they were seeing that problem within therapy, that
So the women that were arguing with this culture of therapy provided by men, who mostly Anglo-Saxon men, that see their values as independence, strength, never being weak, and then they impose this narrative of weakness and unhealthy pathology on their female patients, maybe, or clients, probably they would call them patients, that are valuing family, and they're saying, well, it's not just about me, it's about the whole unit of a family.
Yeah, and it's more, they would be trying to bring, here's this model of health, I'm going to move you from where you are to this model of health, and is it really healthy? It's like, it's just a concept of this is what health is. So there's a problem there. Yeah.
So the relational empathy was created not just to kind of fight the idea that these men were probably not empathizing well enough with women that are different from them, but to argue with the very notion of what health is. And instead of saying, okay, I'm going to move you from your point of unhealthiness to my point of health, rather to redefine emotional health altogether.
Yeah. And the emotional health, I think, is sort of the empathy circle, right? Everyone has a voice. It's not like you got to be strong and independent out there, which is fine. But you also have to think in terms of the structure of the relationship, that everyone gets heard and understood and seen in the relationship.
So you're seeing the empathy circle kind of riding that wave of revolution and saying relational empathy allows for that egalitarian relationship that DJ mentioned, that in which in the empathy circle everybody has a voice, and you could have your individualistic values, but you should be aware that they will be just as important as the values of somebody who's coming from a very community oriented culture.
Yeah, feel fully heard.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, would you be my listener?
Yes.
I've been thinking a lot about this aspect of epistemological injustice, which is this idea of what Edwin was talking about. What is health and what is not health? And how do we define the norms in emotional health? Being a therapist, I give a lot of thought to those questions.
So you've given a lot of thought to this whole epistemological approach to what is health. And I think what Edwin was saying about the male approach and how that is affecting your work with your clients.
And also me coming from a community-oriented culture and working in an individualistic culture, just experientially brings this internal conflict of what would be most beneficial for the people I'm serving.
So this brings up a conflict in you between your background and your lineage based in the community, as opposed to now being in a very individualistic culture. And there's for you an awareness of that conflict.
So I'm thinking of the empathy circle, in which we do sit with the relational empathy, and we're making the choice to make it this kind of very equal connection, and that's definitely more where I'm more comfortable in, because that's where I spend most of my personal life.
So you're sharing that how in the empathy circle, the relational empathy is much more comfortable for you, because that's, you've got that connection and you spend a lot of time in that environment.
This is this kind of bigger conversation. Do we have values-free therapy, or are we humans ever able to allow another person to have very different values? So my stand is always, I could never be value neutral. So I'm kind of this is the struggle that I'm finding myself in. If relational empathy is about everybody coming with their values and co-constructing an empathy circle, does the empathy circle provide its own values? And the answer is obviously on the Culture of Empathy website that Edwin has shared values, out of which mutuality is one. So I'm hoping that made sense.
Sorry, so you're sharing that this discussion is really part of a much bigger discussion about can you actually ever have a value-free therapy? And you're expressing concerns about how if there's relational empathy is really there in an empathy circle, you can have people with quite different values, and you're just questioning how those values expressed by Edwin on the empathy circle website, mutuality, etc., how that really is in practice in the empathy circle.
I'm not really concerned. Rather, I think it's kind of a higher level of values, which means in this place, all of our values are welcome. It's kind of that's maybe hierarchy of values, out of which we're all sitting here, coming from different cultures with different values, and we're all bringing our own stories to the table.
So I added too much in my previous reflection, and you're sharing that that you're not worried about this because we all come to these empathy circles with our shared values from different cultures, different backgrounds, and yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. Feel fully heard.
Thank you, Violetta. And DJ, would you? Please. Thank you. So yeah, values and how they impact on relational empathy, and the mention of humility as being really important resonated with me. I can't remember who mentioned that, but somebody mentioned humility.
Can't really remember who mentioned humility, but you're thinking about the values, and you're thinking about humility in terms of relational empathy.
Yeah, because you asked us to think about, the concepts that go to make relational empathy. And I'm not sure if it's a concept or a principle or a value, or if all those three are similar. But for me, humility is very, yeah, quite important in terms of relational empathy.
So
that
humility.
concept, yeah.
Sorry. Were you finished?
Yes, thank you.
So humility is really important to you in terms of the relational empathy. You're not sure if it's a concept or a principle or a value, but you think it's really important.
Yeah, so because you asked us to bring some concepts, and obviously there are many different definitions of humility, but that idea of being aware of others' needs, as well as my own needs, would seem to be an important part of humility, and therefore of relational empathy.
So you're defining what humility means to you, and it's an awareness of the needs of the other, as well as the awareness of the needs of yourself. And it's that relationship between the two that you think is very important.
Yeah, in terms of relational empathy. I suppose a query I have is about, is there such a thing as non-relational empathy? You know, if I'm trying to define something, it's often the opposite that then helps me see what it really is. So what would non-relational empathy be?
So you're thinking, is there like an opposite to relational empathy? And would that be non-relational empathy? And what would that be?
Yeah, and I think by looking at the opposite, it really helps to define the thing we're trying to define.
And it helps you to look at opposites in order to define what we're trying to define for you.
So non-relational empathy, yeah, I think there are, you know, relating it back to an empathy circle, which is what we're trying to do each time. A non-relational empathy circle, I think, would tie in maybe with what Violetta was mentioning, in that idea of maybe there's a lot of values within that circle that I'm maybe struggling to empathize with, and so that non-relational element, you know, if somebody decides to use the time to talk about history or politics or whatever, rather than kind of, you know, I feel disappointment in myself, so that maybe is non-relational, that I'm, yeah.
Okay. So I think what you're saying is that non-relational empathy to you in the context of a circle would be where people might come. I mean, people come with all their values, all their individual values, right? But it could be that maybe the person is speaking from a place of politics or history or something, and you feel badly. Did you say badly? Disappointed.
I feel disappointed that the time is used in that way that feels, I don't know, yeah, doesn't go, it isn't personalized.
Okay. So non-relational empathy to you would be, in terms of a circle, an empathy circle, would be when you are disappointed that there's not that authentic kind of feeling or connection or relational empathy. There isn't relational empathy, right?
Thank you, DJ.
Yeah, okay, good, yeah. Okay. Edwin?
Listening.
Yeah, so this is very fruitful. I really love, what's happening here. What Wendy just said is kind of where I'm going in my research about it. but I never thought of calling it non-relational empathy.
So you're finding this very fruitful, kind of what we're doing here, and just how Wendy was framing, just having the term non-relational empathy, you find that very interesting, and that concept.
Yeah, very fruitful, very
Fruitful.
fruitful. Thank you. Thank you so much for this experience. So I kind of want to like juxtapose what you were saying earlier, Edwin, about the individual, and what you were saying, Violetta, about individual culture or individual values in your therapy, and kind of reposition it into my own way of being and my own perspective as a teacher, as an educator.
So you want to translate what you've heard us say about individualistic empathy into kind of your own understanding.
Right. So as a teacher, I have embodied this idea of the relationship between self and other, with the notion of emancipation, liberation, freedom, transformation of the other being my students. And in that transformation is also my own transformation. It is a mutual transformation.
Yeah, so as a teacher, you're seeing it. There's this transformation of yourself and the students in your class.
Right, but it has to do with this relationship of self and other.
Oh,
That because I'm a phenomenologist. My work is phenomenology. But my context isn't therapy, and my context isn't empathy circles. My context is the liberation and freedom of my students who were formerly incarcerated or been institutionalized by the system.
Okay, so you're a phenomenologist, and the context that you work in is as a teacher working with previously incarcerated people, and you're seeing the relationship there, and you're striving for a sense of liberation for the students, sort of
Right. So it's
liberating.
real. It's real life liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the. I want to kind of speak to everything that all three of you have said. It is like really hard to do it like in a short period of time. But I do have sort of a response, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so you're really trying to respond to what all three of us have said. It sounds like, oh, I don't have it's a short period of time to respond. A lot that you'd really like to say.
Yeah, of course, because I've been researching this specifically for a very long time now. But I think what Stein says could be translated into something that would be digestible and palatable for Joe Blow and Joe Blow's family, who could come into the empathy circle. We don't have to use the word primordial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can use simpler terms and kind of translate the meaning and understanding into accessible terms that just the average person could understand.
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, I'll speak back to you then.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, it's kind of like I'm thinking about, there's this term like all empathy is relational, right? It's you sort of see it, but do you see it as real? It's kind of like a truth. It is, but people may not see it as relational, I guess. So I'm trying to put words to that. Like, yeah, I'll start with that.
So you're trying to put words to the relational in relational empathy.
Yeah, there's something about how maybe where our awareness is. I can be aware of the relationship, or I can just be aware of maybe just some ideas that are going on in my head, kind of my focus. And so I think maybe the relational is somewhere like how the awareness, where my awareness is.
So you're thinking it has to do with awareness, that there may be some awareness inside of you with ideas in your head or different kinds of things that bring forth the fact that it's relational.
Yeah. So yeah, and then the other thing I want to address that, like community versus individualistically oriented societies, and the idea that a community oriented society is somehow better. I don't see that. I see that authoritarianism is rampant in many community oriented societies. So there's that community oriented versus individualistic society. I don't see an ideal of so-called community oriented societies like in Asia or something, you know.
So from your perspective, you don't see community-oriented societies as being better than individualistic societies. Matter of fact, it may be that communities-oriented societies have, some authoritarian governments and different things like that going on.
Yeah, and they can be quite brutal. Like, Indonesia, where I lived for a couple of years, they had, like a coup attempt there, and it was like, something like 1 million people were killed, and just so there. It seems it's beyond, the issue is beyond individualistic and community oriented. It's like there's empathic communities. So I think mutually empathic communities is like a whole different category. I don't really know that there is one.
So you're not really sure that the empathic community exists, or at least exists in terms of the literature, and that you're trying to define it. And your experiences in Indonesia, which is a community that was, fraught with like 1 million people being killed because of the government. And you're really thinking that an empathetic community is different than a community.
Yeah. And so it's there. So I guess I'm trying to differentiate that, because it's just for my own clarity. Sometimes, community-oriented societies are sort of idealized as some kind of an ideal, but I just see that there can be a high degree of authoritarianism within those cultures, to keep control of everyone. So I'm just kind of, and I see that as the opposite of an empathy, where where there's this mutual listening of everyone.
So your goal is to further define an empathy or an empathetic community where everyone has sort of mutual empathy for one another. And you don't think this has really been defined or maybe even experienced, because a lot of the communities out there are they lack empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel fully heard.
great. Violetta.
I am listening.
Okay. So for me, in my research as an anthropologist, phenomenology serves me as an individual, as a self, doing research on the other.
So as you research the other as an anthropologist, phenomenology serves you.
Yes, and I am an individual and culture specialist, and I learned how to be that with the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA, based on some movements that were happening in the 80s that had started in the 1960s, where anthropologists would go out into the field and be ostracized by the community.
So
you don't have to say all of that, just yeah.
you are a specialist in individual and culture, and you kind of master that in the history that I'm curious about, but I personally don't know much about, is in UCLA in the 80s, kind of a result of work in the 60s that led to accumulation of knowledge about individuals and culture, and you're embodying that knowledge and you're applying it in your anthropology research.
Just wanted to
Yeah.
mention the clock's not on, so.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Edwin. I didn't notice either.
I'll put 2 up there. I think it might be more than 2, but we'll just stay there. Yeah. So my point, I will just illustrate it from an example. It's easy for me to do that. Jean Briggs wrote a book called Never in Anger. And you don't
Never-
have to say all that. You don't have to say that.
Never in anger. I'm just making sure.
Never in anger. Yeah, never in anger.
Okay.
And I think she published it in the 60s. And she's a very famous anthropologist today. But it was a long journey to be accepted because she went out with the Inuit. She studies the Inuit in Canada. And she went out there as a young anthropologist and she made some really big mistakes. She talked to people, foreigners. She behaved in very horrible ways, according to the Inuit.
So the author you're mentioning, who wrote Never in Anger, researched the Inuit as an anthropologist. And in the beginning, she made a lot of mistakes as in her research.
Right. And she was ostracized for an entire year where they wouldn't talk to her and she had to forage for her own food. And
Oh.
so she wrote this book about the experience. And this gave birth to a whole field of anthropology called self-reflexive anthropology.
And after they ostracized her, she, for a full year, had to forage for her own food. And that experience led to a whole new field of anthropology called self-reflective anthropology.
Reflexive.
Anthropology.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Yeah.
Thank you. Wendy, would you be my listener again, please?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Such an enjoyable conversation. I'm just learning so much and kind of savoring listening to different voices and different perspectives. Many things I've never heard of before.
So you're appreciating and your enjoyment of this conversation, of listening to different perspectives and hearing things you haven't heard about before.
Mhm. I love what Edwin had to say, that we could transcend the downfalls of both individualistic and collectivistic cultures into a culture of empathy.
You loved and really appreciate Edwin's vision that we can transcend both the individualistic and the collective cultures into a whole culture of empathy.
I guess I've never thought of it this way, never really put it in this particular statement of value. I think it's more than just conceptualization, but it is part of conceptualizing relational empathy for me. The value is on the egalitarian connection as opposed to either the individual or the community.
So you're wondering if this is part of conceptualizing about relational empathy, the value that Edwin was expressing of just transcending the individualistic and the culture. And I lost the last bit, sorry.
Close, I think it's pretty close. But that brought me thinking whether relational empathy isn't kind of that higher level of empathy that, especially in the empathy circle, provides the opportunity for the other types, that the other facets that we will be researching to be possible. and done in an equitable way.
So you're wondering if this interpretation of relational empathy kind of transcends some of the other aspects of empathy that we are exploring in this course, in this perspective course. And yeah.
Brings me back to the idea of mutuality and having that as a key value of the empathy circle community.
So you're really reflecting on the values of the empathy circle, and this discussion is bringing you back to the value of mutuality within the empathy circle. Key values.
Thank you, Wendy. I feel fully heard.
Thank you. Edwin, would you be
Listening.
listener, please? So one of the things that came up in the Ada Stein video was the definition of empathy as being the experience of foreign consciousness in general.
So you're just addressing that the one topic that came up was the foreign consciousness. I mean, the concept of foreign consciousness in general.
Yeah, so for Stein, I assume by foreign consciousness, she's probably referring to other people's consciousness, whereas I think many of us, myself including, aren't particularly aware of our own consciousness. And so there's a link there with that self-empathy that Priyanka was researching.
So when she's talking about foreign consciousness, she's meaning about consciousness of other people. And then there's also the self-empathy, was just being aware of your own consciousness.
Yeah, I find that use of foreign consciousness quite a weird terminology. And that's why, you know, I'm very, very aware that many people who initially come to an empathy circle, their own consciousness might be quite foreign to them.
Yeah, it's like people who come to the empathy circle, they're just not that aware of their own consciousness when they come to the empathy circle.
Yeah, and I, you know, hearing that reflected back, I realized that that's me being very judgmental. So I'm grateful for that, and I'll look into that.
Yeah, so you're when I reflected that back, it's like, oh, maybe I'm just being judgmental, and now I may better reflect on that.
Yeah, I suppose I'm basing it on my own lack of awareness of my own consciousness. So I feel, you know, there's just so much that I don't know about my own consciousness. So equally.
Yeah, so you're sort of personalizing. It's really yourself. You're not, there's so much you don't know about yourself. So you're just kind of making it more personal. You're about your own personal self-awareness. Yeah.
So, you know, she said, Ellie Anderson, who in that video says that when we experience another consciousness, that is empathy. And at one point, DJ, you were talking about, well, empathy, it isn't just for other people, you know, it can be for things, it can be for animals and such like. So I'm just wondering where that definition of experiencing another consciousness and defining that as empathy, how that relates to, yeah, maybe trees and birds and everything. Maybe there is a link there, but yeah, just
yeah. So Stein talks about the awareness of other consciousnesses, and you're just wondering how to relate to what DJ was saying about empathizing with places and nature, and sort of just what is the connection between those two?
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, I speak to Violetta.
With pleasure. Also, as an empathy circle leader, I lost track of time. Do you know how much time we have left?
Oh, yeah, DJ, how much time do we want to, we have
We have 6 minutes left.
6
Okay,
minutes. We're going to
1:30.
go to the half
Okay.
hour. Okay. Yeah. Trying to think of what I want to say. Oh, I did want to address what you were saying about neutrality, or Violetta, is empathy neutral, or whatever. There's something about neutrality, and I don't see that there is neutrality. You can't have neutrality, and I'm a strong advocate for empathy. I'm not ashamed of it.
So you're addressing a word I don't remember saying about neutrality, that there's no neutrality here. You're very passionate about advocating for empathy, and you're not afraid to say it. I wonder if you misheard mutuality as neutrality.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure, but
Oh, I just heard, anyway, it kind of tapped into the concept of neutrality, in terms of values, is it value free? Yeah, value free, right? So I don't think you can be value free. And when I do mediations, I don't say I'm neutral. I say I am strongly advocate for empathy, and I'm going to be advocating for empathy in this relationship, so I just put it out there to begin with.
so actually you were talking about several circles ago when I mentioned value free, I think in the context of therapy, and you just don't believe in that. You don't think any human could be value free. And when you do conflict resolution empathy circles, you're saying, I'm not neutral. I'm not coming here neutrally. I'm coming very strongly advocating for empathy.
Yeah. And, while I see the importance, the helpfulness of therapy, it's one person supporting another, who needs, support. And I see that as sort of like an emergency empathy. People are needing this emergency empathy. They need space. And it's part of the larger culture of empathy, that aspect.
And you're seeing, I think about therapy, you're seeing it as an emergency therapy. Emergency empathy, that the culture of empathy does need when people are in kind of a crisis and they need this emergency fix or dose of empathy.
Yeah. And there are situations people are in conflict. I don't say, hey, we need mutual empathy. I just start empathizing with both parties, for example, because it's like I'm empathizing, but the intention is to bring it towards mutuality. In the back of my mind is, I'll listen to this person, I'll listen to that person until they calm down to the point where they can start listening to each other, and they can start listening to me, and we will bring it into a mutual empathic relationship. And so I see sort of, therapy is sort of in that, as sort of part of that.
And another example of emergency empathy, you see this kind of conflict mediation role you play, in which you're mutually empathizing with one side and then the other side of a conflict until they're calm enough to be mutual with one another, and then might maybe progress towards some kind of resolution. So both therapy and conflict resolution are falling in that group of emergency empathy.
Yeah, and in therapy, they'll say, well, we're in a relationship, we're in the therapeutic relationship, but it's not a full mutual empathic relationship. And it doesn't have the bigger picture of, as you as a patient, empathizing, learning to empathize with me, learning to empathize with your family, being able to hold empathy circles or empathic state of mind, with your family, friends, and community. So there's something about holding that larger empathic culture or vision or relational empathy, that all these are sort of parts of it and move towards this larger state of being, I guess.
So we're kind of making a full circle to the first time DJ talked in this empathy circle, when she talked about reading about relational empathy in nursing, and I'm not sure what the other field was. But
Social work.
social work, yes, where they do talk about relational empathy, but it's not this kind of egalitarian relationship. And you're saying they are still contributing to the culture of empathy because the helped person learns how to do that and probably does it with their friends, with their family, and in this way contribute to the culture of empathy. But ideally, scaling up these efforts would lead to a more egalitarian and more mutuality overall, which is the major characteristic of relational empathy, as we talked about earlier, as DJ mentioned.
Yeah, that's the essence
Many of us
it.
echoed.
So I feel heard.
Okay.
And I just noticed it's the time. We didn't send any notice to everyone. Should we send a notice to them or just bring them back?
Well, send them a notice because they
Okay.
might not know what time it is.
So give them,
That's fine. So we'll have one more minute. So while he's doing that, I just want to read a little quote from the other film, the other video, that we didn't get to share. Like Violetta, you haven't seen it, but I think it's really important. It relates to this anti-relational or I say anti, non-relational. I like anti though, that's kind of cool, anti-relational. Okay, so this is the quote. It is easy to be empathetic when the subject raises no objection to your sense of self. When at an impasse, we need to find a path that's different from our own to understand someone else. It is so much harder to do than lend your heart. It's so much harder to lend your heart in that circumstance. And I think that's what you're talking about, kind of, Wendy. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about. And what you're kind of talking about, it's like, that's the breakdown. That's the breakdown, is when you say, oh, no, that does not gel with me. I'm like, Crystal would say triggered. I don't like that word trigger, but you're triggered somehow, just to use a word I don't like, but it's useful right now because we have no time to talk about it. But it's almost like you're re-traumatized by something. And he, in the other video, says you have to have a parallel experience. You can't find something that's really, gelling directly in that mutual exchange, then you have to have a parallel experience that you just substitute in. I kind of get it, maybe, sort of, enough to have empathy.
you ready to close?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I don't know which concepts we're bringing back, DJ.
Yeah.
We're going to brainstorm. We're going to brainstorm as a group. So, it's up to you what you contribute. Everybody contributes to it. Welcome back, everyone.
So
Was it good? Are you good? Crystal, good? Lou, good?
yeah, was the circle good?
Yeah, like,
You're
how are you
asking?
feeling? Are
Oh.
you feeling good? Are you feeling like we can do this? We can co-construct the concepts of relational empathy together. Yeah. So everybody gets to contribute. And so instead of having a discussion right now, I think we'll just jump into the brainstorming, or if people feel like they really want to have a discussion, we could have a discussion for 10 minutes. Just an open discussion. I'll put it out there. Does anybody want an open discussion right now? Does anyone feel like they just want to say something about something?
I like the idea of starting with each person just making a statement about what they what they think it is or contribute, and then we could see what happens after that.
Sure, go ahead, Lou.
So what came to me out of the discussion was the idea that if empathy is a way of being, that relational empathy is a way of being together, and that and for me, what really became highlighted was the idea of, so I have tended to think of empathy as me being present. If I'm trying to be with someone empathically or be empathic with them, that it was me listening to them, receiving them, reflecting back, however they are. Like I'm in service to them, and they just are however they are, and could be angry, could be whatever, and that relational empathy actually says that they have an obligation to not be any way that they are, but to try to make themselves understood. In other words, that it's not one direction, it's both directions. That creating the connection and understanding is mutual, not one-sided. And that was an insight for me.
Cool. Anyone else?
Well, and I'm sorry, and I'll just add, the way that grounds in the empathy circle is that the speaker might make adjustments to how they're speaking so that the listener understands them.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read a little blurb that I read to my breakout room at the end, and it's from the other video, but I think it's very important. As Crystal said, the other video is so wonderful, but we can't do it all in 2 hours. He says, it is easy to be empathetic when the subject raises no objection to your sense of self. When it is an impasse is when you need to find a path that's different from your own to understand someone else. It is so much harder to lend your heart in those cases. You don't have to respond to that. That's okay. If you watch the video and you get the whole story, it makes a lot more sense. Because he does a whole parallel thing. He really gets into the nitty-gritty of when you don't feel that relational empathy. And that's one of the things, if I could, ask you, Wendy, do you want to contribute that whole wonderful idea you had about non-relational empathy?
Okay, so, certainly. First of all, I really appreciated, DJ, you bringing in that quote, both in our group and to the bigger group, because, yeah, the emphasis on the heart felt very, very important, because a lot of the discussion on the Stein video had been, fairly head orientated, and that the other video is very, it's easy to feel more embodied when you watch the other video. So yeah, I just made the comment that it's sometimes easier to understand what something is by exploring its opposite. So what is the opposite of relational empathy? Edwin made the point that all empathy is relational. Well, so what does that really mean? What would non-relational or anti-relational empathy actually be? Would there be, just no mutuality, no so there was a lot of stuff we discussed about that. And then also made the point that Stein made this definition of empathy as being an awareness of a foreign consciousness. And for me, maybe that idea of a foreign consciousness relates not just to the other, but to self. Do I know my own consciousness enough to actually explore relational empathy? So foreign is also foreign to self, not just foreign to other. Many many of us don't always know our own consciousness moment by moment, day by day. So yeah, just that link between non-relational and foreign, these kind of words cropped up a lot for me. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'll say I put it in the notes for our thing too, but what I got from our group was that for this group, empathy is a way of being. So a relational empathy, I'm repeating what Lou said, is a way of being together. One of the things that came up is that it's a two-way path of empathy from self-awareness to other awareness, which kind of mimics what was just said right there. And then as for the purpose of training the facilitator, so we speak to be understood, we listen to understand, we assume positive intent, and remember, it's not about us. And those are key ways to exist in being so that you can create that safe space as a facilitator for somebody else to experience their way of being.
Great, thank you. One more person, and then we're going to go into the brainstorm. Please save your concepts for the brainstorm. Crystal, go ahead, hon. Oh, you don't have anything to say? Okay. Violetta? No? Edwin? Jana?
One thing, yeah.
Oh,
In terms of the other video, I do not see that as him talking about relationality. I think he's coming from in sort of an individualistic mindset. That's just my, don't want to add that.
yeah, and I'd just like to respond that he's actually trying to become the murdering Congolese soldier. And so that's really big. That includes politics, the world, murderers, or however you want to call it. That's just my 2 cents on that.
I would bring that into imaginative empathy, doing role playing that you're imagining. So I would put that in that category.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? Okay, so the way the brainstorm works is that everybody contributes. I'm just going to open up a whiteboard here on Zoom. So on the screen, you're just going to see the whiteboard, and you're going to have to just say the words in a way that I can hear them. So if 2 people say words at the same time, I won't be able to hear it, but we also want to be super quick. So if we can do it in 3 minutes, something like that, that would be fantastic, okay? So just think of concepts of words that you think should be included in this very broad-based conceptual model of relational empathy. And there are no rules, and whatever you write down, I'm gonna say, but we can always, you can decide to remove it later if you change your mind, but you can put in there whatever you want. And please don't put it in the chat. It works better if we do it on the whiteboard together. Everybody can see what you're writing. Everybody can participate together.
So we're saying things and you're writing them on the whiteboard?
Yes, sir.
Pathos?
Mutuality?
Okay, hold on a second. Give me one little second. Okay, mutuality. Okay, I got it.
Humility.
Well, humility. Okay.
Positive intent.
Awareness of the whole.
Awareness of other.
Monitoring connection between people.
Holding space.
I'm gonna put, Lou, I'm gonna put connections and then monitoring. Separate. I'm sorry, what was the next one?
Holding space.
Keep going.
Awareness of self.
I would say human potential.
Transcendence.
Didn't hear that.
Transcendence.
Relationship.
I'm going to add self.
Serve.
Being,
What is that?
being,
Being.
Scaling things up.
I'm going to say consciousness. What was that, Wendy?
Scaling things up.
Equity.
Culture of empathy.
Fidelity.
I'm going to say patience. We only need like 4 or 5 more.
All of the above.
No.
Acceptance.
Mhm. What about experience? What about memory? What about language? Okay. Now we're done unless anybody has something to add. We could add
present
one.
reality.
Present reality. Okay. Now,
Actually, presence.
presence. Mhm. Okay.
Well,
This
no,
is,
sorry, presence.
yeah, I'm sorry. We'll just know it's presence when I rewrite it. Okay. Because this system, I can't go back and change it. I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay, so everybody take a look at the list and pick your 3 most favorite or your 3 most key concepts and just think about it for a minute. And when you're ready, just say your name. So it goes into the text, and so I know who's speaking. Just say your name, like, you know, this is DJ. My 3 words are blah, blah, blah.
This is Kara. My 3 concepts are positive intent, holding space, and present reality.
What was the first one?
Positive intent.
Oh, sorry. Okay, good. Thank you, Kara.
This is Edwin. My 3 are awareness of whole, awareness of other, awareness of self.
This is Violetta. Positive intent. My 3 words are positive intent, equity, and language.
This is Wendy. My 3 are awareness of other, presence, which didn't get on the presence, and consciousness.
So this is Lou. My three are mutuality, awareness of whole, and connections.
Jana, and my three words are awareness of self, awareness of other, and connections.
Crystal, my three words are language, consciousness, connections.
Is that everybody but me?
Did you?
Okay, so I'm gonna do language, awareness of whole, and connections. All right, so this was pretty easy, actually. You guys did great. So what we have here, it looks like we have a bit of a tie between awareness of whole and awareness of other. Connections is a winner, right? With 4 votes. And then we have 1, 2, 3 tied for the other 2. So let's look at awareness of whole, awareness of other, and language. And pick one of those 3. And go ahead.
We're each picking one of those 3.
Yes.
Okay. So mine would be awareness of whole.
Mine would be awareness of whole as well.
Awareness of whole.
Awareness of whole, Edwin.
And Kara, awareness of whole.
The same.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is going to take language. That's okay with everyone. Language, awareness of whole, and connections. And those are our 3 concepts. And we're going to put all the other concepts inside those concepts. So
why was language selected?
Because it was awareness of other, language, and awareness of whole, and everybody chose awareness of whole, but I chose language.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Sorry, I forgot to explain.
I didn't understand that. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we could put awareness of other, but it's a little bit redundant, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's going to work a little better because we want to think about what's going to work better in our concepts. I'm trying to get this to be a different color here.
Well, if I vote for awareness of other, then do we vote again for those 2?
No, because I think it's too similar. I think it's too similar. It's not going to go away. You're not going to lose anything. It's all going to be the same. It's just a matter of dividing them up into concepts. Okay, so now we go down the pathway here. So we're going to have awareness of whole. We're going to have connections. And we're going to have language. And we're just going to put them in the different circles. Of course, it's not going to look really good. It would look better, and I can make it look better in another program. This is just a whiteboard. So where does pathos go? Does pathos go in awareness of whole, connections, or language? Pathos. What do you think, Crystal?
I would put it under awareness of whole.
Yeah, that's what I think so too. Okay. Where does mutuality go?
Connection.
Yeah. Humility.
Awareness a whole. Connection. Mhm.
Maybe language.
I would say language.
Yeah, I would say language too. Humility means different things to different people. Positive intent.
Connections.
I would just say for me, everything goes under awareness of whole. So
Well, you're not playing the game. Um,
And I have to leave about 5 minutes early right now. So thank you, everyone.
Bye, Kara.
Bye.
Bye, Clara.
Thank you.
so we don't have to finish this. I mean, I can finish it myself. It's not a big deal. Of course, everything belongs to everything. It's all one. It's all part of relational empathy. That's part of the point, obviously. But this feeds into a paradigm. And the paradigm is very useful when you're doing research, especially if you're doing research about how people speak about it. So for instance, I'm going to stop sharing. For instance, I have the text recording of everything that's been said today. So I could go through that and I could take almost every concept that has been talked about, at least in my text. I didn't have your breakout room. I didn't have that information. But I could put that into a paradigm that's actually a three-dimensional, 9-set, 6-sided cube. Think of a cube with multi-layers. And they're related to 3 levels this way, 3 levels this way, and 3 levels that way. It becomes a three-dimensional concept based on concepts that go in there, or words, or, you know, it could be experiences. So for instance, if I go to that whole idea of walking in someone else's shoes, how that doesn't fit me, that I really like his idea of taking off your own shoes, carrying your own shoes, and then walking in someone else's shoes, but you're carrying your own close to your heart. So you're still yourself. You know, where would that fit in this paradigm? Well, it could be awareness of whole, you know, and this awareness of whole could be something that's very cosmic, something that's very sacred, something that's very difficult to, it's not something physical, right? Because we're using the shoes as symbolism. And whenever we're using symbolism, we're getting into this consciousness level of being human. And so the only thing that we're doing here today is putting our concepts, our ideas of a relational empathy together. That's all we're doing. Doesn't change the world. It doesn't change anything. What it does is it gives us a possible paradigm to work with when we're creating the curriculum or creating the approach or strategies, and we're presenting it to Joe Blow and Joe Blow's family, right? Does that make any sense what I'm saying? It's okay to be resistant. Humans are resistant by nature.
yeah, you're
Especially
creating a
those-
model. You're taking everything everyone has said and putting it into a framework and into a model. And it kind of, you can see where everyone's input was, is how I understand. Are you going to create that three-dimensional? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I am going to do that for you.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'll like send it to you guys or put it somewhere for you guys to see it. So thank you guys for your participation. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, DJ. Let's give her a round of applause. Yay! It was a lot of work, a lot of fun. I just love all the thoughts and how we can sort of, each thought is sort of a jumping off place to another, so to other thoughts. And yeah, really appreciate sort of the approach and kind of exploring this. So look forward to seeing that model. So we're kind of right at the top of the hour. So next week, Lou and Crystal, you're doing, yay, blocks to empathy. So
Actually, I have a conflict next Friday. I wasn't really calculating this, like the timing when we would be presenting, but I realize I am next Friday. I'm in a training in Sacramento, so I'm not available next Friday.
you want to postpone it by 1 week? Next week we could do like an open empathy circle with whoever's here to just sort of digest what we've done so far, so that Lou and Crystal would have time together to
the following Friday. Actually, I might have a problem with the following Friday as well. That's the day before my son's wedding. Yeah, I apologize for not kind of tracking this.
Lou and I are talking on Sunday. I'm confident that I can present the information on Friday. Unless everyone would like to wait for Lou, I'm comfortable proceeding.
You're happy, Crystal. That sounds great.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll do that then.
Okay.
Right. Okay, well then, see you next week, and look forward to the next session. And thanks everyone for
Thanks, DJ.
participating.
Thanks,
Thank you.
DJ. This
Yeah,
was
thanks
fun
for all the work,
and
DJ.
and educational for me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
bye.
Oh, thank you.
Let me just stop the recording.